Okay, so you want to buy a Subway. Sign a lease in a strip mall, hire some kids, watch the footlongs walk out the door. It's the most recognizable sandwich brand on the planet. There are more Subways in America than there are Starbucks. How hard can it be? Here's the strange part. Subway just had the most profitable year in its history. $688 million in net income, up from $15 million just 2 years ago. And in that same year, 729 of its franchisees quietly turned off the lights and walked away. Not last year, every year for the last decade. Subway has closed 8,345 net U.S. locations since 2016. That's roughly the entire domestic footprint of Taco Bell erased. And while franchisees were losing their savings, corporate net income multiplied by 46 times. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how that math works, how buying a Subway actually works, where the money goes on every single sandwich, and why the person who owns the sandwich shop is not the one making money on the sandwich shop. Let's start with the price tag. Compared to almost any other major franchise, Subway is cheap. That's the whole pitch. To open a traditional Subway, the total initial investment runs about $230,000 to $500,000. Non-traditional spots inside a Walmart, a gas station, an airport run about $150,000. Compare that to McDonald's, where the minimum entry cost is closer to $1.4 million and you need at least $500,000 of that in your own cash before the corporation will look at you. The franchise fee, the money you paid just for the right to put the word Subway on a sign, is $15,000. That's it. Corporate makes it as easy as possible to get in. You need a minimum net worth of $100,000 and about $40,000 to $80,000 in liquid capital. That's roughly the profile of an upper middle class American with a paid-off house, or a first-generation immigrant with a lifetime of savings. Subway knows exactly who its customer is, because you are the customer. Not the person eating the sandwich, you. The person buying the store. You put down between $150,000 and $500,000. You sign a 20-year franchise agreement. You lease a spot in a strip mall. You hire the staff. You buy the ingredients from approved suppliers. You run the business. And from the moment you open the doors, 3 things happen every time a customer walks in. 8% of the gross sale goes to corporate as a royalty. 4.5% goes to a national marketing fund, and another chunk goes to whatever the corporation decides to charge you this year for technology, equipment, remodels, and mandatory upgrades. Add it up. Before you pay rent, before you pay labor, before you pay for the meat and the bread and the electricity, 12.5% of every dollar that walks in the door is already gone. And that 12.5% is calculated on gross sales, not profit. Which matters more than it sounds, because here's the number that ends most Subway stories before they begin. The average Subway location does about $500,000 a year in sales. On $500,000 of gross sales, the 12.5% ongoing fee comes to $62,500 a year. Every year, for 20 years. Now compare that to Jersey Mike's. Same category, same product, direct competitor. Their average store does $1.4 million a year. Jimmy John's does about $1 million, which means a Subway operator is paying corporate a slightly larger cut of a store that generates less than half the revenue of the store next door. The Subway franchisee isn't running an unusually bad business. They're running a business that was designed to be small. And on a business that's small, the royalty structure doesn't just eat profit. It defines whether the store can exist at all. Here's the math a franchisee actually lives in. Average store, $500,000 in sales. 12.5% to corporate. That's $62,500 gone before you do anything. Food costs run about 30% of sales. Another $150,000. Labor for a Subway that stays open 12 to 15 hours a day, 7 days a week, runs about 25%. Another $125,000. Rent, utilities, insurance, packaging, credit card fees, another $100,000 easy. That leaves you, the owner, with roughly $60,000 to $80,000 a year before you pay taxes and any debt on the loan you took to buy the store in the first place. You just bought yourself a job that pays about the same as being an assistant manager at Costco. Except, at Costco, you can quit. You signed a 20-year contract. But here's where the story gets uncomfortable. Because that math assumes nothing goes wrong. And in Subway's world, something always goes wrong. And the thing that goes wrong is almost always a decision made in Miami, at corporate headquarters, that cost the franchisee money the franchisee never agreed to spend. Take the meat slicer. In 2023, Subway announced that every one of its 20,000 US locations was going to get a brand new deli meat slicer, so that Subway could finally compete with Jersey Mike's and Jimmy John's on freshly sliced meat. Corporate proudly announced they were spending $80 million on the rollout and giving the slicers to franchisees free of charge. Except the slicers weren't free. They cost about $3,000 to $6,000 depending on the model plus warranty. Franchisees had to pay for the space, the counter modification, the training. the additional labor to operate them, the additional labor to clean them, and the food waste from end cuts of meat that had to be thrown away because low-volume stores couldn't slice through a full log before the shelf life ran out. Bill Mathis, the head of the North American Association of Subway Franchisees, an organization representing about half of all Subway locations, put it plainly on a podcast. There was no data showing the slicers drove sales. There was no data showing they drove customer counts. There was no data showing they drove profitability. What they drove was labor costs and food waste in an industry with razor-thin margins. The franchisees didn't want the slicers. The customers didn't ask for the slicers, but every store had to install them. Because in a franchise agreement, the corporation gets to decide, and the franchisee pays. Then there are the remodels. The average Subway remodel costs $50,000 to $100,000 per store, mandated by corporate on a schedule the franchisee doesn't control. That's a $50,000 to $100,000 bill for a store that clears $60,000 in a good year, which means for one full year, minimum, you're working for free just to keep the sign lit. Then there are the value menus. In 2024, corporate rolled out a nationwide $5 promotion. Meal deals designed to bring customers back. Franchisees objected. Because when a customer pays $5 for a sandwich instead of $9, the store loses $4 of revenue. But corporate still takes its 12.5% off the top of whatever the ticket rings up. The franchisee absorbs the entire discount. Corporate absorbs nothing. The franchisees have a name for this. They call it their bottom line getting killed. Corporate has a name for it too. They call it a strategic value platform. So who wins? In April 2024, a private equity firm called Roark Capital bought Subway from the two founding families, the DeLuca and Buck families, who had owned it since 1965, for $9.6 billion. Roark has $37 billion in assets under management and specializes in one thing: franchises. They own 105 franchise brands, generating $70 billion in annual revenue across 67,700 locations. They own Arby's, Buffalo Wild Wings, Sonic, Baskin Robbins, Dunkin', Cinnabon, Auntie Anne's, Jamba, Carvel, Carl's Jr., Hardee's, Culver's, Cheesecake Factory, and now Subway. They also own Jimmy John's, Subway's direct competitor. The Federal Trade Commission actually paused the Subway deal to investigate whether one company owning both of the two biggest sub-sandwich chains in America was a competition problem. They let it go through anyway, which means the person who now decides how much a Subway franchisee pays in fees also decides how much a Jimmy John's franchisee pays in fees. If a Subway franchisee gets angry enough to leave the system, guess whose competitor they're most likely to sign with? And here's the number that reveals what Roark actually bought. In 2023, right before the acquisition, Subway had $15 million in net income. In 2024, the year of the acquisition, that jumped to $397 million. In 2025, it hit $688 million. In 2 years, corporate profit multiplied by more than 40 times, while total franchise revenue actually fell by 6%. That's not a coincidence. That's the entire private equity playbook. You buy a franchise system that stopped growing, you cut corporate overhead, you push more costs down onto the franchisees, remodels, technology fees, slicers, value promotions, and you extract every dollar of trapped equity the founding families were too sentimental to squeeze out. The DeLuca and Buck families spent 60 years building the biggest sandwich chain on earth. Roark bought it, and in 18 months more than quadrupled its profitability. They didn't do that by selling more sandwiches. They did it by selling the same sandwiches through a system that transfers wealth in one direction only. Which brings us to how a Subway story usually ends. Meet MTF Enterprises. 43 Subway restaurants. Filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2025 after taking out merchant cash advances, just to keep operating. Meet Riversub. 48 Subway restaurants. Bankrupt in 2024 following a wrongful death lawsuit corporate had no obligation to help with. Meet Jessica and John Mesa, ordered by a federal court in Northern California to close or sell all 14 of their Subway restaurants by November 27th. These are not tiny operators. These are people who owned dozens of stores, employed hundreds of workers, built their entire adult lives on this business. And when the numbers stopped working, corporate didn't lose. Corporate just found new franchisees. Because Subway isn't in the business of running restaurants. Subway is in the business of continuously selling new people the right to run restaurants. Every closure is a store that gets sold to someone else at a discount, who then buys a fresh $15,000 franchise fee, signs a new 20-year contract, spends $50,000 on the mandatory remodel, and starts paying 12.5% again. From the corporation's perspective, a bankruptcy isn't a failure. It's a customer turnover event. And that is the number that ends this video. 2 scenarios, real numbers, best case. You buy an established Subway in a good location. $500,000 in sales, disciplined operations, low debt, a lease you actually negotiated. You clear $80,000 a year in your pocket. Payback on your $300,000 investment, about 6 to 8 years of full-time work. At the end of 20 years, if corporate renews your contract, you've made maybe $1.5 million in cumulative income for 2 decades of running a small business. Then you either sell it to the next franchisee or corporate declines to renew and you walk away. Worst case, corporate mandates a remodel in year 6 that costs $80,000. Then a value menu that cuts your ticket average by 15%. Then a technology fee increase. Then a new mandatory piece of equipment. Then Roark decides your market is oversaturated and starts approving new subways within a mile of yours, cannibalizing your sales because Roark doesn't lose money when a store closes. Roark loses money when a market has fewer stores paying royalties. You take out a merchant cash advance to keep the lights on. 2 years later, you file for bankruptcy. Everything you built goes back to the system. Somewhere in the middle is the average. That's the 729 stores that closed last year, and the 631 the year before, and the 443 the year before that. Now, step back for a second and look at what actually got built. The Subway franchisee is not the customer. The Subway franchisee is the product. They are the mechanism by which capital gets pulled out of small towns and immigrant communities and retirement savings, converted into royalty payments, and delivered upstream to a private equity firm in Atlanta. Every $15,000 franchise fee, every 8% royalty, every 4.5% marketing fee, every mandatory $6,000 slicer, every $80,000 remodel, every merchant cash advance, every bankruptcy that turns into a fire sale transfer to the next hopeful owner. It's all pointed in the same direction. Fred DeLuca started Subway in 1965 with a $1,000 loan. He wanted to pay for medical school. He never finished. But 60 years later, the company he built is doing something he almost certainly did not intend. It is not selling sandwiches to Americans. It is selling the idea of owning a business to people who confuse working for a corporation with owning one. The house always wins in a casino, and everybody knows it. In a franchise, the house also always wins. The only difference is who thinks they're the house. If you sign that contract, it isn't you.